Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show. Lin Li was not listening to the castellan's speech at all. He could not help it. That type of speech was meant to be polite and friendly, but without any meaning. Instead of getting bored with the castellan's speech, Lin Li would rather use the same time to observe the 4 guests from the Brilliant Shrine. Then, Lin Li realized that the 4 guests were actually no different from himself. None paid attention to the castellan. After returning to their seats, they had been talking among themselves softly. Then, it seemed like they had some disagreement among them. Lin Li clearly saw how the female paladin got agitated. Is that an internal strife? Looks like heaven's on my side. Lin Li laughed at their misfortune. But, the female paladin saw his smile as soon as it appeared on his face. What a hideous laughter. Watch out later, the female paladin exclaimed angrily through her gritted teeth. At that moment, she really felt like using the sword in her hand to purify Lin Li. She had never seen such an egoistic necromancer. How could he be so arrogant with that dirty magic and evil religion? Unfortunately, the banquet had not ended. In fact, it was this matter that created a conflict between Bishop Loren and herself. The former firmly thought that they should prioritize the interests of the Brilliant Shrine before the purification of any darn undead creature. To think about it carefully, Bishop Loren was being reasonable too. The fact that the Brilliant Shrine had the chance to bring their teachings to the people of Roland City was all thanks to Castellan Arather. The change of the Castellan would mean a threat to the Brilliant Shrine's influence. Who knew if the next Castellan would be in support of their teachings? Although the ability of that necromancer was not outstanding, the undead creature by his side was definitely a true opponent. When Rena stood in front of him just now, she could feel a very dangerous tension. Although she had 3 bishops with her, she did not have the confidence to defeat them with ease. That was what Bishop Loren was concerned about. He feared that the 2 darn fellas would escape when the situation got uncontrollable, or in the process implicate Castellan Arather or other guests. Hence, Rena could only be patient. The Castellan ended his speech very quickly. Melodious music resumed, and the guests soaked in a joyous atmosphere once more. No one noticed anything unusual with the 2 tables of guests. Arather had a tall crystal glass with him as he greeted the other guests while he made his way over to Lin Li's table. Apologies, everyone, please pardon me any lack of cordiality due to the large number of guests, the Castellan addressed his guests. Then, he put his gaze on Sienna. Captain Sienna, can I have some of your time to introduce you to some people? Oh, of course. Sienna replied. His eyes lit up instantly as he put down his goblet and followed behind Arather immediately. It seems like this Castellan is rather interested in grooming Sienna. Lin Li smiled. The Castellan would not take the trouble to introduce Sienna to the others, or even invite him to the banquet if he simply wanted to reward him. It was good news to Lin Li. When he decided to give Sienna this opportunity to claim credit, he was already planning how to make use of Sienna's mercenary team in time to come. Lin Li did not need a team of 30 men, with the stronger ones being only level 10. Now that Sienna could gain the support of the Castellan, the ruler of Roland City, the weak foundation of the team would definitely be strengthened and developed for the better. Just when Lin Li was still immersed in his delight, a disgusting voice reversed his pleasant feelings entirely. Haha, isn't this Mage Felek? I didn't expect you to be here at the Castellan's banquet. Oh, yes. Do you mind telling me whom you stole the invitation card from? Haha, Lazaric dissed Lin Li. Sigh, what a spoilsport. Lin Li really felt like cussing out loud as he turned over to the owner of the voice, reluctantly. Actually, he did not need to do that. Although there was a lot of annoying people in the world, the most annoying one would no doubt be the son of the Castellan of Duland, Sir Lazaric. Why are you silent? Haha, is it because you are feeling shame after I exposed you? I can't believe you can feel embarrassed too. Lin Li was right, the man behind him was indeed Lazaric. But, it was still alright for him. Lazaric had already toned down a lot compared to how he previously was, and wasn't wearing that silvery armor anymore. Despite that, the suit he was wearing now was definitely one that cost a bomb. Looking at it from the distance, Lin Li could tell from the delicate craftsmanship that it was the work of a reputable seamstress. Unfortunately, Lazarick was the model this time, and the fine suit looked extremely awkward on his short and plump figure, especially when he was laughing arrogantly. It was as though he was butchering a pig. Lin Li really had the urge to give him a tight slap. Of course, Lin Li was still able to control himself. That was because Lazarick was not alone. There were two other people beside him. One was a handsome man in his 20s with thin lips. According to Jirian, that was a symbol of a mean personality. After taking a closer look at him, Lin Li realized that he was the man he met at the time consignment store earlier this afternoon. Now that he saw him again, the sense of familiarity struck him once more. Lin Li just could not remember where he'd met him before that. The other person was a man around 50 years old. Although his body was small, lean, and wrinkled, the black robe on his body was tidy and modest. Beside Lazarick and that young man, he absolutely looked like a normal old man. But Lin Li did not dare to treat him that way. He saw the ring on the old man's right hand. The gem on the ring was not big, and was not very glossy. From afar, it just seemed like a normal green gem that lacked quality, yet Lin Li knew it was not what it appeared to be. Wings don't make one an angel, do they? A birdman has wings too. Being green may not mean it is any random green gem, but an emerald dream gem. The difference between an emerald dream gem and a normal green jewel could be seen from the degree of brightness of their surface. For a normal green jewel, extra polishing would allow it to gain radiance regardless of its quality. Unlike any other green jewels, the emerald dream gem had a stubborn surface that would stay cloudy regardless of polishing. It would cause people to be unable to discover its identity from its looks. At first glance, it would look like a dull crystal. But, if anybody were to think that it was a random green jewel of bad quality, it would be a major mistake. The emerald dream gem was so rare that even Lin Li could not add it into his collection, despite having all the riches in the world. In reality, that was the most regretful thing for Lin Li when he entered the emerald world. As a mage, the emerald dream gem was what all of them dreamed of having. It was said that the emerald dream gem had the powers to calm WYRMS. When a mage used the emerald dream gem to calm himself down, it would actually allow him to enter a state of meditation that endowed him with unlimited mana. This meant that he would avoid the risk of the bite of mana, and be unbeatable. The only thing he had to do was to wait for his opponent to commit a mistake. How could a normal old man own the emerald dream gem? While Lin Li was still surprised, the old man made his way towards him. His wrinkled face was smiling, and seemed to bear no enmity. "Young man, I presume you are Mage Felix, aren't you?" "Yeah, I'm Felix." "But, Elder, how did you know me?" "I'm William. The time consignment store you patronized this afternoon is one of my properties." "Hee, fret not, let us sit down to discuss it. You know, I'm too old to have the stamina you youngsters have. I heard from Brooke that Mage Felix purchased a pair of daggers from my shop." That was the first thing the old man said after taking a seat beside Lin Li. Lin Li could not help but feel wary. Could it be that this elder knew something about the daggers? Otherwise, why did he mention them? With such a suspicion, Lin Li nodded cautiously. "That's right. But, Mr. William, is there anything wrong with that?" Lin Li replied. No. I didn't mean there to be anything wrong," William responded. Lin Li's question did not take away the smile on his face. "I'm only curious about the reason that attracted you to them." They had been in the showroom for around 1 or 2 decades. If Brooke had not mentioned them to me just now, I would have forgotten about them. Lin Li glanced at the elder suspiciously. He was still wondering if the old dude got his courage to ask that sensitive question from drinking too much. Although there was no big secret hidden in the pair of daggers, why would the old man think he would let him know the reason behind his purchase when they were not even close to each other? Hence, Lin Li responded with a light-hearted question. "Mr. William, what do you think about the weather today?" William had never been so speechless. Actually, although he knew that he had asked a sensitive question, he really asked out of curiosity. That pair of daggers had been placed in the showroom for 1 or 2 decades. No appraisers could tell the origin of the daggers since his grandfather's generation. As the heir of the time consignment store, William was extremely keen to know what was so special about them. Yet, he did not expect Lin Li to change the topic so brazenly. For his reputation, there were many people who would try their ways to get close to him. Nobody was like this young mage, who treated William like a thief, just as though he feared William would steal money out of his pocket. Being totally clueless about Lin Li's personality, it was not William's fault. To Lin Li, reputable people were not worth a penny. He was a man who would never want to be at any disadvantage, so he would not feel like entertaining people who could not promise him benefits. Of course, this principle applied to the owner of the time consignment store, and the legendary figures of Roland City as well. But, since William was a cultured man, he was not angry at Lin Li's attitude. Despite his awkward position, William merely laughed it off. "Bastard, are you tired of living? How dare you treat Uncle William so rudely?" William's calmness did not mean that other people would not be angry. Lazarick stood up at once, and his agitation made him topple a few glasses of wine on the table. His face was crimson and his arms were waving vigorously. A timid man would have been scared by him. Unfortunately, Lin Li did not have a cowardly personality. Hence, when Lazarick stood up, he did not even pay any attention to him. To Lin Li, that man with exaggerated actions was not a human, but a buzzing fly. "Watch your words, Lazarick." "You're too rude," said William with an ashen face. "But, Uncle William." Although Lazarick was usually arrogant and unreasonable, he did not dare to be too arrogant before this man. From how his father usually treated William with extreme politeness, he knew that this skinny old man should not be just an elder who owned the time consignment store. His status would not be as what he portrayed it to be. Just when Lazarick was still thinking of excuses to defend himself, he felt somebody tugging on his sleeves. He stole a glance and saw his companion gesturing to him. Lazarick hesitated before sitting down unwillingly. Only after that did the young man stand up from his seat slowly. "My apologies, Mage Felix. As you see, Lazarick is a straightforward man. If his words offended you, please don't be appeased. I will help him apologize to you in advance. But, your attitude towards Mr. William indeed lacks proper respect." "Is that so?" Lin Li said as he glanced at the man casually. He became clearer of the man's identity now. This fella had to be related to someone he knew of. Otherwise, he would not have stepped out to create such an incitement between William and him. Although that man seemed to be apologizing for Lazarick, his actual intention still surfaced in the last line he spoke. "Argus, could you help me take the wine I left on the way here?" William spoke. "All right, Mr. William." The young man froze. His smile became very awkward. But, he was definitely not as foolish as Lazarick. After a short moment of hesitation, he excused himself from William and Lin Li. "I'm so sorry, Mage Felix. These kids are still learning. Please do not hold it against them." William smiled apologetically after the young man by the name of Argus walked away. "Hee, Mr. William is too nervous." Seeing that the elder was really sincere in his apology, Lin Li started to form a good impression of William. "The question I asked earlier on was indeed too abrupt. But, I hope that you don't misunderstand me. I'm just asking as a curious appraiser. When I was very young, my father kept on reminding me that a successful appraiser has to have a curious heart, and not be satisfied with the knowledge he already gained. You really want to know?" "Yes," William replied and nodded seriously. After thinking for a while, he called Norfeller over. "Norfeller, lend me the Heaven's Wrath for a while." "Yes, master." Norfeller did not ask anything. He took down the pair of daggers that was hanging at his waist and placed it on the table. "Mage Felix, this is..." William gasped after he saw Norfeller. "His name is Norfeller, a companion I met in Duland." Lin Li naturally did not reveal Norfeller's true identity. After introducing Norfeller to William briefly, Lin Li picked up one of the daggers. "Mr. William, what material do you think these two daggers are made of?" William thought for a while. "From its dull and black appearance, it should be made of hell iron." No. Lin Li shook his head in disagreement. He turned the dagger around and showed its edge to William. "Look at this edge closely. It is not as sharp as fell metals. Is that due to the long period of time it was left unused? You know, they have been in the showroom for 1 or 2 decades. That would be enough to blunt its edges. It is not related to how it was left behind. Magical weapons are not any normal weapons. The magical elements within them have a fluidity that can affect the way these weapons rust. The rusting of normal weapons starts from their blade, as it is the weakest and thinnest part that will always come into contact with moisture. A magical weapon, however, will protect the edge from rusting due to the magical elements that are the most vigorous in its edge. Hence, although the result is the same, the process is reversed. So that was the reason. William nodded reflectively. To be honest, the concepts the young mage had shared with him just now was not complicated. In fact, they were all very shallow. William knew for sure that the mage was speaking the truth. The rusting process for a magical weapon and a normal one was indeed different. Yet, it was this shallow knowledge that caused him to overlook it. Who would look at a rusty weapon? Furthermore, the decay had been going on for hundreds of years. How many people in the world would be so free to take time to observe the way in which a weapon decayed? Then, Mage Felix, what magical metal is it made of? Adamantine of bad luck. A type of magical metal that has a lot of weaknesses. To an extent, it is no different from a normal metal. Among all the different magical metals, it is the least tough as well. If one does not employ a special forging technique, all it takes for it to break is a trivial battle. Look at this edge carefully. Apart from the adamantine of bad luck, I really cannot think of any other magical metal that would become like this. Lin Li took a pause before he continued speaking. But, an advantage that the adamantine of bad luck has that outweighs any other magical metal's strong points is its capacity for storing unlimited magical elements. The adamantine of bad luck would be able to overcome any source of mana and mageweth regardless of how menacing they are. I understand it now. William exclaimed in enlightenment. Although Lin Li had only explained it briefly to him, it was sufficient for him to get the whole picture. As the chief appraiser of Roland City, no other people could have more experience and better ability than him. Furthermore, being the owner of the time consignment store, he had seen many weapons that were out of the norm. William might not have heard of the adamantine of bad luck, and did not know the origin of that magical metal, but it did not affect his judgment towards the value of the metal. Its capacity to house unlimited amount of mana could explain everything. So, how is it, Mr. William, do you have any other queries? Lin Li asked William smilingly as he returned the dagger to Norfeller. That's it. Thank you, Mage Felix, William replied while he shook his head. Then, he stood up from the chair slowly. Hee, you are too courteous. Lin Li smiled. Just when he wanted to reply William with some formalities, he saw William bowing before him. Thank you for your advice. What are you doing? Lin Li asked, in a daze. The old dude was too easily excited. All Lin Li did was mention a few characteristics of the adamantine of bad luck. If he were to explain the forging process of the Heaven's Wrath to the elder, would it cause him to have a heart attack for him? Damn, he would not have talked to him if he'd known it earlier. Lin Li rubbed his nose and laughed bitterly. The bow was nothing to Lin Li. What mattered now was the result thereof. Lin Li did not need to raise his head to know that all eyes were on him. William's bow was like a sudden strike of thunder in the banquet hall. The entire hall instantly turned silent. Everybody, including the host and the guests of different statuses, had their gazes on this old and young duo. They were flabbergasted. No one could expect that the legendary figure of Roland City and the owner of the time consignment store, William, would bow before a 20-years-old youngster. Has the world turned crazy? The banquet hall was unusually silent. The guests had forgotten that they were in the midst of conversation, and the musicians had forgotten that they were in the midst of a performance. It was as if everything had turned stale, including time. Mr. William. What are you doing? After what seemed like an eternity, the voice of the castellan broke the eerie silence. The castellan had a glass of wine in his hand as he walked towards them in shock. Perhaps he was too stunned by what he saw, but the castellan did not even notice that he had slanted the glass, and the red wine was flowing out of it. My apologies, Arthur. I guess I might have stunned your guests, William laughed, then he leaned closer to Arthur. It is nothing special. I was just thanking Mage Felix for his guidance, he told Arthur in a low voice. After he finished speaking, William did not make sure if the castellan understood his words. He turned back to Lin Li, and said, Mage Felix, I'm very impressed by your wisdom and profound knowledge. If there is a chance in the future, I would love to hear more advice from you. But, there are too many people today. Should you have the time after this banquet, please visit the time consignment store. I have a lot to consult you on. Of course, Lin Li responded uneasily as he tried to avoid everybody's eyes. It was too awkward. Lin Li felt like an animal exhibited in the zoo. He regretted answering William's question. Now that he did that, Lin Li was really treated like a rare animal under the scrutiny by the public. After he got Lin Li's assurance, William nodded in satisfaction, and left with Lazarick. Phew, Lin Li could finally breathe after seeing William take his leave. Just when he wanted to call on Norfeller and escape, the castellan approached him passionately. I can't believe that Mage Felix is such a talented individual that even Mr. William has a good impression of you. Oh, yes. Mage Felix, what do you think of my proposal just now? What proposal? Lin Li could not recall when he actually had a discussion with Arthur. He thought they were just acquaintances. Mage Felix must be a busy man. Have you forgotten that I suggested that you could help guide my 2 children on magic before the banquet started? Oh. Lin Li suddenly recalled that Arthur had indeed made that request before the banquet commenced. But, it was just part of formalities. Neither of them actually took the words said by the other seriously. Lin Li could not believe that Arthur could mention it again after 2 hours. At that moment, Lin Li did not know if he should laugh or cry. William was the reason why Arthur tried to mention this matter again. Lin Li could tell from everyone's reaction when he received that bow that the elder had to be someone of great importance. Otherwise, the guests would not be so flabbergasted. Unfortunately, apart from how he gave old William some advice, the castellan was not aware of other trouble Lin Li had gotten himself into. The 4 people from the brilliant shrine had been staring at him intensely, especially the paladin named Rena. Lin Li was absolutely certain that this sexy paladin would surely use her sword to slay him as soon as she found a chance. Lin Li rubbed his nose, and did not give Arthur an immediate reply. He was just wondering what would Arthur's expression be if he let him know the truth. Arthur interpreted Lin Li's hesitation as reluctance to take up his proposal. He knew it had been his fault not to show Felix more kindness. He was so blinded by Jason's reputation in Duland that he overlooked Sienna's attitude toward this young mage. Sienna definitely showed more respect to this mage as compared to how he treated Jason. That was certainly a genuine attitude. If he'd been clever enough then, he would have realized that this mage was definitely somebody of authority. Why else would a man like Sienna be so respectful towards him? Unfortunately, he'd overlooked Sienna's formal attitude towards this mage. He had been too focused on getting close to Jason, and neglected Felix's existence. How should I put it? Arthur rubbed his hands awkwardly. He was planning a few scripts in his mind, but dismissed them as they lacked conviction. Just when he could not make up his mind, the young mage spoke. I don't have much time as I'm returning to Duland City tomorrow. But, I still have some time tonight. Why don't you bring your children to me after the banquet? I would be with Sienna. Then, I can teach them some basic knowledge about magic. The rest could be discussed again the next time I visit Roland City. Really? Arthur asked in surprise. Felix's swift reply was outside his expectations. Yes, then that's that. Mage Felix, I will bring them over to you after the banquet. Arthur said as he nodded his head profusely. Sure. Hearing that, Lin Li nearly burst out laughing. He even tried to bite his teeth to prevent himself from doing that. In fact, he did not expect Arthur to be so agreeable. He had gotten himself an amulet without much effort. Now, everything's settled. Since the castellan was going to send Lin Li off after the banquet, how could the 4 people from the Brilliant Shrine find a chance to attack him? While Lin Li was laughing internally, Lazarik was scratching his head in confusion. The situation that happened at the banquet was too complicated. His IQ could not allow him to understand the reason why Uncle William had not taken his side. Although Lazarik had told William about the conflict he had with Lin Li that afternoon, his uncle could still chat so sincerely with that fella. Uncle William, why are you so nice to that fella? Asked Lazarik. Although he was a foolish man, he had a strength of his own too. It was this straightforward personality that brought him to ask this question. Lazarik, when are you returning to Duland? William asked, casually. Lazarik's question was ignored. Huh? Lazarik was stunned by his sudden question. Lazarik, go make arrangements and return to Duland tomorrow. After saying that, William waved his hand tiredly. All right, Lazarik. Look, I need to take some rest now. You can leave now. All right, Uncle William. As he watched Lazarik leave, William sighed. What a foolish son Beckham has. If this goes on, Lazarik will definitely get himself into trouble one day. William was really annoyed. Beckham's idiotic son seemed to be causing a lot of trouble every time he came to Roland City. Although he was very annoyed, having to give Beckham face, he had no choice but to help clear up the mess. Thankfully, he had some influence in Roland City, otherwise, he would have no way to clear things up. However, William knew that he could not handle it himself this time round. That young mage called Felix was not as nice as Lazarik had imagined. It did not matter that Lazarik was clueless how powerful the other party was. After all, he was just an idiot. Other than having a rich and powerful father, he had nothing else. However, William realized something clearly. How could somebody that owned the VIP card of the Glitter Gold Trade Union be so casually provoked? How could William not know what the VIP card of the Glitter Gold Trade Union meant? It represented that this mage Felix was being supported by the whole Glitter Gold Trade Union. Under all sorts of circumstances, he would receive full assistance from the Glitter Gold Trade Union, be it financial or military support. In other words, being an enemy of this mage Felix would also mean being an enemy of the whole Glitter Gold Trade Union. Even if it was Lazarik's father, Duland City's Castellan Beckham, he would have to lower his head in front of such a strong power such as the Glitter Gold Trade Union. Furthermore, this young mage called Felix was no ordinary person himself. Just look at the attendant beside him. Even though William was old, he wasn't blind. He believed that he could still recognize a powerhouse that was level 17 and above. If that youngster called Norfeller was active in Roland City, he would be one of the top powerhouses there. Even Castellan Arthur would have to speak politely when conversing with him. Yet, he was just an attendant for Mage Felix. Then, Mage Felix's status. William sat quietly, thinking about the frightful power that this young mage could possibly have, that he was only in his 20s, and about the deep knowledge he'd displayed during their conversation. After thinking about it over and over again, he could not understand, where did such a terrifying person come from? He had not heard from anyone in the past that there was such a powerful young mage, called Felix, in the breezy plains. After thinking about this, William slowly stood up, and called a middle-aged man in his 40s over. He quietly ordered, Rode, go find out the background of this mage Felix. But, remember, do not alarm anyone, especially Mage Felix himself. Yes. The middle-aged man was short and looked plain. He was naturally somebody that could not be found after being thrown into a crowd. Yes, William thought about it for a while, and remarked, I heard the accent of this mage Felix. He seems to be from Gerosis. Just start from there. Yes, the sky started to darken, and the guests were dispersing. When William was leaving, the banquet hall was almost empty. Other than Lin Li's group sitting in the corner, there were a few guests from the brilliant shrine seated at the other end of the banquet hall. I guess it's time we left. Lin Li slowly stood up and tidied up the robe he was wearing. He glanced at those guests from the brilliant shrine while speaking. Sienna looked at the empty banquet hall, and stood up after nodding his head. Then I'll say goodbye to the Castellan. There's no need to, Sienna. The Castellan will return with us later. Ah? Sienna was immediately dazed. Lin Li laughed, but did not explain the reason. He simply brought Norfeller along and walked towards those 4 guests from the brilliant shrine. Excuse me. I'm really sorry, but I think I'll make a move first. You really think that you can leave the Castellan mansion? The beautiful paladin stood up quickly. Her delicate face was cold. She was like a sharp sword that just got unsheathed, and a chilling aura was being emitted from her whole body. Won't I find out after trying? Lin Li's face still carried a polite smile, but his immense mana surged out impolitely. In an instant, there was an intense magical wave spreading throughout the banquet hall. Even with the powers of these 4 guests, they could not help but feel uneasy when they were in the midst of this intense magical wave. Rina's fair face showed a flash of panic. The strength of this magical wave far surpassed her imagination. When it had suddenly appeared, the feeling it gave her was like a large mountain was on top of her. Luckily, she reacted just in time, and invoked her combat energy to defend the moment the magical wave started to spread. Otherwise, Rina doubted that she could stand right now. Although this was the case, this magical wave was still too powerful. Rina could clearly feel that the combat energy that she was so proud of could not spread out under the leeward side of this magical wave no matter how she invoked it. That silver flame could only remain a thin layer, barely protecting her body. The most frightening part was that Rina distinctly saw that this damned necromancer's face had a fake smile throughout the whole time. He had a relaxed and cozy expression as though this incomparable magical wave had nothing to do with him. How could this be? This time, Rina was somewhat panicking. The collision between magic and combat energy had immediately alerted the 3 bishops. The 3 of them had stood up simultaneously, and 3 equally powerful holy auras started to spread out. But, it was at this time, that the incomparable magical wave suddenly disappeared. Without the suppression from magic, the silver combat energy was released with a boom. Rina, who was showered in silver flames, was like the legendary seraph, filled with an elegant yet pure aura. Unfortunately, that dumbfounded expression ruined the beauty of it. The current Rina was like a kid that had run into trouble, standing there in bewilderment and staring at the chairs that had been flipped over by the combat energy. As for that damned necromancer, he had turned around and walked far away as though he had nothing to do with all of that. The hell, when Rina had snapped out of it, that damned necromancer had already walked to the Castellan. From afar, the 2 of them seemed to be like old friends that had not seen each other for a while, and were now enthusiastically talking in a soft voice. This shoal, Rina was gritting her teeth while cursing, and then she unsheathed her sharp sword. Paladin Rina. It was at this time that Bishop Loren suddenly called out to her. What's wrong? Bishop Loren. Let's leave this place first. As for the issue of undead creatures appearing at Roland City, I will write a report and hand it over to the Brilliant Shrine. I believe the Pope will quickly send people over to handle it. Why? Bishop Loren, could it be that you're, Rina gently bit her lip, but she still asked, could it be that you're afraid? Rina's question was rather rude. If it was somebody else, they would most likely lost their temper. It was lucky that she asked Bishop Loren. This bishop was already in his 70s this year, and Rina was just like a granddaughter in his eyes. Although Rina had questioned him rudely, Bishop Loren did not get angry. He just kindly smiled. Paladin Rina, in the heart of the Holy Light's followers, there is nothing called fear. Then, why do you give up on purifying this necromancer? Could it be that you do not know that he could very well bring a huge disaster to Roland City? Bishop Loren, this is a rare chance. He does not have a chance to summon undead creatures to aid him in Roland City, and he also does not have any escape routes. The old man smiled and shook his head. No, 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 Paladin Rina. Did not you already notice? That magical wave just now was a warning from him. He warned us not to take action lightly. I admit that he had the advantage just now, but don't you forget, I am the only judge paladin amongst all of the paladins. In a real battle, I have an 80% chance of winning against him. With the strength of you 3 bishops, it is impossible for them to win. No, 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 Paladin Rina. They do not need to win. All they need is merely a little time. Rina was in a daze, but she was not stupid either. It was just an instant before she understood. Damn, haha, Bishop Loren laughed. This necromancer is not simple. If I am not mistaken, the magical wave he released just now was indeed to warn us that he has enough power to bring forth a great disaster to Roland City before we can purify him. Indeed, there was something that Bishop Loren left out. From Bishop Loren's perspective, the advantage that the necromancer had was not small. After all, he had lived for tens of years. Be it judgment or experience, they all surpassed Rina's. There were some minute details that Rina might not have picked up, but he had accurately done so. That magical wave was definitely not the limit of that necromancer, because he looked too relaxed and casual. He suppressed Rina's combat energy without breaking a sweat. It was especially so at the end. Although this necromancer backed off, there was no sign of it at all. Bishop Loren, who had conversed with some mages before, knew that this required a rather terrifying mental strength as well as a perfect control that was precise to every single thread of mana. The prowess of this necromancer was far beyond Rina's imagination. If there was a real battle, it would be hard to say who would emerge victorious. Are we going to let it slide just like that? We must look at the bigger picture, Paladin Rina. We must first find the person that the Pope asked us to. As for how to deal with these 2 undead creatures, we should let the Pope decide. Based on Lin Li's current magical attainments, it was more than sufficient for him to be a mentor for an archmage, not to mention those 2 apprentices that had just started learning. Lin Li was somebody that had mastered more than 10 core magical mantras. His understanding of magic surpassed that of an average archmage. In this aspect, even those powerhouses that lived for more than 100 years like Anduin might not be better than he. That night, the castellan had brought his son and daughter along, and Lin Li did not waste time. He quietly spoke with the castellan for a bit, and took out a notebook from his pocket. This notebook had been kept since Lin Li had just arrived at Amril and started learning magic from Anduin in the Sunset Mountains. There were a few low-level spell incantations written in the notebook, as well as some know-how and skills that Lin Li had come up with. Of course, these skills and know-how were not very profound. After all, Lin Li had been a total newbie in magic back then, even though he had a terrifying talent. When he first came to Gerosis, he only had superficial understanding even when it came to common knowledge. The know-how and skills that he came up with back then could only be described as crude. However, for the castellan's son and daughter, these crude know-how and skills were more than sufficient. After all, they were just apprentices that had just started. Even entering the state of meditation was hard for them. What they required was not profound magical knowledge, but the interest and passion for magic. Only passion and interest would allow them to tide through the boring journey that was learning magic. Actually, Lin Li did not have to spend so much effort. Just casually teaching these 2 newbie mage apprentices some basic knowledge would occupy them for months. After all, everyone did not take all of these with something important. Even the castellan himself was just trying to use this relationship to overtake William. However, Lin Li did not want to do that. One of the reasons was because he wanted to return the favor to the castellan. No matter how it is phrased, it was only through the castellan's help that Lin Li had managed to escape from that paladin's group of 4 during tonight's incident. If the castellan had not provided any cover for him, both parties might have already clashed after the banquet has ended. A paladin as well as 3 bishops. Lin Li did not have the confidence that he would definitely be victorious. Furthermore, he did not wish to provoke the brilliant shrine through this incident. This was the breezy plains, which was in the brilliant shrine's vicinity. It was not wise to provoke the brilliant shrine in this area. As for the other reason, it was more complicated. It could be that Lin Li did not do things sloppily, or maybe it was that Lin Li could not bear to see the two take the wrong path. The castellan's son and daughter had a rather decent talent for magic. It was especially so for that kid called Cinder, whose talent could be described as splendid. Lin Li, who had been through all of those things, naturally understood it better than anyone else. The fundamental knowledge was always the most boring one. Out of all the youngsters that had just become mage apprentices, 9 out of 10 of them would give up at this point. Rather than teaching them the fundamental knowledge, why not teach them some interesting know-how and skills as well as some low-level spell incantations? It would then be easy to make them entranced by this mysterious form of art. The only thing that made Lin Li somewhat unhappy was that Cinder's attitude was really odious. Ever since he had entered the room, he was sulking. No matter how Arather prodded him, he did not speak a single word to Lin Li. The only time he smiled was when he was flipping through the notebook. However, being unhappy was just being unhappy. Lin Li did not take it to heart. The child was sulking, but surely it did not mean that he would have to stoop down to the same level? Afterwards, Lin Li taught them some simple things. For example, how to improve the efficiency of their meditation and how to avoid the bite of mana when casting spells. When Lin Li stopped speaking, it was already late at night. Arather saw that it was getting late, and was too embarrassed to continue holding them back. He thanked Lin Li again, and then brought his son and daughter into the carriage. Cinder, what happened to you just now? Once they got up the carriage, the castellan's face started to frown. Seeing that the castellan's face was gloomy, Cinder started to get frightened. He just looked down while speaking in a soft voice. I don't like that fella. Nonsense. The castellan's voice immediately rose. His hand was shaking because he was too angry. These few years, you always bugged me to find you a magic teacher. Now that I have found one for you, you actually said you don't like him. Are you trying to be the death of me? But I just dislike that guy. Cinder lowered his head, he did not dare to look at his father's face. Let me tell you. I don't care if you like him or not. Mage Velik was personally invited by me. You had better have respect towards him. Father, you don't even know how detestable that guy is. He is rude and crude. When he returned, he actually dared to order my sister around like a maid. Shut up. Seeing that the castellan was about to lose his temper, Yvonne, who was at the side, hurriedly protected her brother. Father, don't be angry. My brother is still young and immature. Give him some time and let him spend more time with Mage Velik. He will come to his senses. This little bastard, he will be the death of me one of these days. Aratha let out 2 deep sighs, and started to calm down slowly. This son of his was indeed immature. He only knew how to create trouble for Aratha. It was just like that recently, he had sneaked out of the Castellan mansion by himself and got caught by members of the Sire bandits. Luckily, Mage Velik rescued them. Otherwise, something worse might have happened. Oh, yes, Yvonne. I haven't had the chance to ask you since you returned. How much do you know about this Mage Velik? I don't know. You don't know? The Castellan was stunned for a bit. His expression was somewhat confused. Didn't you hire Sienna and the rest? How can you not know? No, father. This Mage Velik is not somebody from a mercenary corps. What did you say? The Castellan was shocked, and then he spoke softly. Yvonne, tell me everything again. Remember, do not leave out a single details. It's like this, father. That night, we encountered a monster in the Dragon Mountains. What kind of monster? It was a very scary monster. It was as tall as a hill, and covered in white fur. Oh, yes, it could even use magic to freeze everything. What the hell, that's an ice howler. The Castellan was extremely surprised. He was not like Yvonne, a clueless young lady. After hearing about those several characteristics, he immediately guessed what monster she referred to, the legendary ice howler. The castellan was thoroughly shocked this time. Although he'd known that it would not be smooth sailing when Yvonne went to rescue others, he had not thought that it would have been so dangerous. That was the Ice Howler, a descendant of an ancient magical beast, a terrifying magical beast that had savageness flowing in its veins. Yes, Captain Sienna seemed to have recognized it as well. That monster was called Ice Howler. Initially, Captain Sienna and the rest could not defeat the Ice Howler, but thankfully, we bumped into Mage Felix and the rest. Wait, Yvonne, the castellan swallowed hard, and his voice turned somewhat coarse. What you mean is that Mage Felix killed the Ice Howler? Arthur was really shocked. He was clearer than many others about how terrifying the Ice Howler's strength was. A few years ago, Arthur had brought an army with him to venture into the Dragon Mountains, wanting to exterminate the Sire bandits that had settled there. In the end, they were stopped by a group of magical beasts that had suddenly appeared. Amongst this group of magical beasts was an Ice Howler. The Ice Howler had left a deep impression on Arthur back then. The immense physical strength and the omnipresent ice attribute magic of it were just like a nightmare. Arthur knew that Mage Felix was indeed powerful, but Arthur could not believe that he was strong enough to kill an Ice Howler. No. Yvonne gently shook her head. I knew it, how could it be possible? Just when Arthur had let out a sigh of relief, the young lady spoke again. It was Mage Felix's attendant that killed the Ice Howler. The castellan almost went mad on the spot. If these words were not said by Yvonne, Arthur would definitely not believe them. Just a mere attendant could kill the Ice Howler? Then what kind of powers does Mage Felix himself own? Okay, let's take a few thousand step back. Even if Mage Felix does not have much power himself, and maybe just has such powerful attendants, then wouldn't he have an even more terrifying background? Arthur really did not dare to think about it. Just what kind of a person one had to be to have such powerful attendants. Unfortunately, Arthur did not imagine that was just the start. Yvonne's account afterward almost made Arthur completely break down. The thousands of undead within the ruins, the Lich occupying the bell tower, and the soaring humorous Wyrm. All of them were terrifying entities. For Arthur, it was just like a myth. It was half an hour's journey from the mercenary corps' camp to the castellan mansion, but during this half an hour, Arthur's mouth was not shut once. His frightened expression seemed to have solidified on his face, and it continued so until the carriage entered the castellan mansion. How can this be possible? After returning to the castellan mansion, Arthur did not sleep at all. He had been repeating the same phrase over and over again throughout the night. It was only when dawn almost broke when Arthur wore his jacket and came out of his bedroom. The castellan mansion's garden was really huge, and had all sorts of plants. Every time when it was dawn, it would give off a scent that makes people feel relaxed and joyful. However, it was somewhat weird today. Today, Arthur was not like how he was usually, taking a break after walking through the garden. Instead, Arthur's footsteps were hurried. After he came out from his bedroom, he hastily walked past the garden, and arrived in front of a wooden house that was covered in green vines. This wooden hut seemed somewhat simple and crude, just like it was made from a few simple pieces of wood. Yet, it was filled with a harmonious sense beauty as though it had completely blended in with the garden around it. Arthur stood in front of the wooden hut, and gently knocked on the door twice. Master Bettany, can I come in? Arthur's voice was abnormally respectful. Luckily, there was no one in the garden, otherwise, they would be shocked until their mouths were wide open. Arthur, I remember that I told you before, if there is nothing important, it's best that you do not disturb me. No, Master Bettany. I came over because I have something very important to tell you. Come on in and we'll talk. Meanwhile, Lin Li had already packed his luggage. The issue at Roland City had already reached the end of a phase. The food that was worth 1,000,000 gold coins had already been dealt with last night. Sienna did his job swiftly. Before the banquet ended last night, he had already settled this issue with the castellan. The food that was worth 1,000,000 gold coins would be delivered to Roland City within a week. Since the issue of food could be settled, there was no need to stay in Roland City any longer. Furthermore, Lin Li did not forget that the four fellas from the Brilliant Shrine were still concerned about him. If he stayed longer, there might come a day when he would be stopped by them. By that time, there might be another problem that could not be avoided. This was a place where one was apt to get into trouble. The earlier he left, the better. After packing up his luggage simply, he called up Norfeller, Ujfalusi, Jason, and the rest. He spoke to Sienna for a bit before he entered the carriage that would take him to Duland. A tower at the outskirts of Black Cloud's town was piercing through the clouds. From afar, it looked mysterious and solemn. Lin Li had just gotten off the carriage when he met Herza. After not seeing this old man for more than 10 days, he clearly saw the latter had become thinner. However, this was understandable. When Lin Li left, almost everything was thrown onto the old man. He had to handle all sorts of chores and supervise the construction of the tower. It was already a feat for him not to collapse from exhaustion after all those days. "Felix, you are back." When the old man saw Lin Li, he greeted him anxiously. "What happened, Mr. Herza? Did something happen at Black Cloud's town?" No, let's go. I'll tell you as we walk." The old man dragged Lin Li into Black Cloud's town. "It will be your president's inauguration ceremony in 5 days. There will be a lot of prominent figures invited at that time. I have already settled the invitation letters. Come with me and see if there is anything that I have missed." "So fast?" Lin Li had a shock. "There's no choice. This is the decision of the Supreme Council." Herza brought Lin Li to his living quarters, and quickly brought out a thick stack of invitation letters. "Take a look at these invitation letters first. If there is nothing missing, I will get somebody to deliver them tomorrow. Additionally, there are some details about the president's inauguration ceremony that I need you to confirm yourself. Let me say this, Mr. Herza. Why is the Supreme Council so anxious this time?" Lin Li flipped through the invitation letters in his hands while chatting with Herza. "I have just received the order as well. As to why it was decided so, this is something I cannot know. Perhaps you should consult your mentor Andoin. He is somebody that has the highest chance to be an adjudicator. He should be well informed about this aspect." Lin Li looked at the invitation letters in his hand. The presidents of the 24 guilds of magic were all invited. Balba of the Pharmacists' Guild, Alakir of the Adventurers' Guild, and Hoffman of the Glitter Gold Trade Union were invited by the Supreme Council as well. Additionally, the royal court and the military of Felon would also send their own representatives for this celebration. Representing the Felon royal court was the current king's second son, His Highness Arthur. As for the Felon military, it was Lin Li's old acquaintance, Mr. Sager, the captain of the Sky Knights. Thinking about this middle-aged pervert that molested a female adventurer in the black market, Lin Li shook his head while smiling. He thought to himself, it's better to appoint 2 men to watch over him during this inauguration ceremony. Otherwise, if he were to set his sights on a pretty female guest, wouldn't that cause some big trouble? What shocked Lin Li the most was that the Supreme Council actually invited 2 guests from the Leaden Kingdom. The difference between them was that one was Archbishop Martin from the Brilliant Shrine, and the other was High Priest Richie from the Darkness Shrine. It was no big deal about the Darkness Shrine. After all, after that disaster, the Darkness Shrine was just an empty title. Other than Sendros being rather reputable due some attainments in pharmaceutics, few heard anything much about the Darkness Shrine in the last 100 years. However, it was different for the Brilliant Shrine. Ever since Rosario became the Pope, the influence of the Brilliant Shrine was like the sun at high noon. Devout followers had filled every corner of Anrel, and the Paladins' Inquisition had large numbers of legendary powerhouses. With Pope Rosario setting his sight on the whole Anrel, there was no longer any force that could go against the Brilliant Shrine except for the Supreme Council. The Supreme Council and the Brilliant Shrine were 2 strongest factions in Anrel. They ruled all sorts of territories, and controlled the fates of countless people. Many times, they just needed to say a single sentence, and it could affect the arrangement of the whole Anrel. Without their support, At least two of the four great human nations would disappear. It was probably because of their respective positions, but the two forces had never had any sort of conflict between them in the last 1,300 years. Yet, they did not have any dealings with each other, either. The Supreme Council and the Brilliant Shrine seemed to have come to a tacit agreement. One party would amass followers in the Leaden Kingdom, while the other pass on magical knowledge in the Felon Kingdom. It was just a thin wall between them, but they each stayed in their own lane. They would still show some restraint during the occasional minor disputes. Even though 1,300 years passed, the two forces were like strangers. It was also what gave Lin Li a shock. If they did not contact each other for 1,300 years, why did the Supreme Council suddenly think of inviting somebody from the Brilliant Shrine now? Furthermore, the Brilliant Shrine was willing to respect them, and even sent an archbishop to attend the inauguration ceremony? Lin Li knew that this was a rather high standard. In the Brilliant Shrine, the position of the 6 archbishops was only below the Pope himself. The words of 3 archbishops were almost equal to the will of the Pope. A person like this had actually been sent to attend his inauguration ceremony. It had to be known that when the kings of several nations were enthroned, the Brilliant Shrine only sent out a cardinal. Frack, why did they make it so grand? When he saw the invitation letters, the first thought that came to Lin Li's mind was not to be overwhelmed by an unexpected favor. It was the exact opposite. Lin Li was so frightened that he broke out in a sweat immediately. He did not think that this was because he was so well known that even the Brilliant Shrine of the Leaden Kingdom that was so far away knew about him. He did not believe that he was so shocking a personage in the Felon Kingdom that even the Archbishop from the faraway Leaden Kingdom would have to bow his head to the ground. This Archbishop Martin coming to the breezy plains would not simply be there to attend the inauguration ceremony. It was just that Lin Li, for the time being, still did not know the other reason. However, it had better not be for Norfeller or Ujfalusi, these two fellas. Otherwise, something big was going to happen during this inauguration ceremony. Herza had always done his job without leaving out a single detail. This thick stack of invitation letters, whether their addressees should be invited or not, represented people that had already been invited. Lin Li flipped through it for a long while, but could not think of anything that had to be changed. The only concern was that a few of the Breezy Plains guests were missing. Oh, yes, Mr. Herza. Is there no need to invite the castellans of the Breezy Plains? They are still not worthy. That was what Herza said. The president's inauguration ceremony was no small matter. To put it in Herza's words, this time the Supreme Council had taken it seriously like never before. Not only had they invited all of those they could, even the Supreme Council itself sent an arbitrator to host the president's inauguration ceremony. Herza could also be considered a sly old fox that never let his feelings show, but when he spoke about the arbitrator, he could not help but show some excitement on his face. The Supreme Council had a total of 3 arbitrators. They directed the Supreme Council together, and decided the fates of the thousands of mages in Amrel. All of them had experienced the battle that happened 1,300 years ago. They even battled alongside the god of mages, Juresco, before. They were living legends, the creators of miracles. The 3 arbitrators of the Supreme Council were universally accepted by Amrel as the 3 strongest mages. In this world, there was not a single mage that dared to challenge their dignity. There was also not a single mage that dared to question their orders. They were living gods in the world of magic. As to how strong these 3 living gods were, there was nobody that could clearly describe it now. People only knew that these 3 arbitrators had already transcended the legendary realm in the battle 1,300 years ago. After 1,300 years, their true strength could only be properly judged by a true god. As to what sort of realm was above the legendary realm, even Lin Li only had a superficial knowledge of it. He had faintly heard about it from Anduin. Once mages transcended the legendary realm, they would take a final step and enter the true sanctuary realm. It was a realm that was omnipotent, a realm where rules could be changed or created according to one's will. With just a short incantation, one could create a cataclysmic power. However, even Anduin's understanding of the sanctuary realm's power was only at the imaginative level. The gap between the legendary and sanctuary realm was almost infinite. It could be overcome with a sudden epiphany, or it could end with spending the rest of your life without the last step ever taken. Thinking about the fact that he would have a chance to meet an arbitrator in a few days, even Lin Li could not help but feel somewhat excited. However, Lin Li quickly did not have the time to be excited anymore. It was because he was so busy that he almost died in the next few days. After the guest list was settled, Lin Li was completely swamped. The Breezy Plains Guild of Magic started from scratch, so how could it be an easy task to steer it? Lin Li, as the president, faced the issues that required his decision in short succession. The first thing, without a doubt, was the tower that had just been completed. Before going to ruins of Sire Town to rescue people, the master of inscription, Moke, had asked Lin Li what sort of Manhwas needed to be inscribed on the insides of the tower, and Lin Li's answer back then was rather simple: 10 wards of bad luck. As of now, the 10 wards of bad luck had already been inscribed. As to what to do after inscribing, Moke insisted on waiting for Lin Li to decide it. No sooner had the dawn of the second day broken than Moke knocked on Lin Li's door. The expression of this master Moke was filled with unconcealed disdain. Moke looked down upon this guild president that had been appointed by the Supreme Council. Not only was it because he had some resentment towards the Gerosis Guild of Magic, but also mostly because this youngster was really disappointing. To be appointed a guild president at a tender age was a once-in-a-blue-moon chance for any mage. Furthermore, this place was the Breezy Plains. It was the Supreme Council's focus of development for hundreds of years. Whoever could become the president of the Breezy Plains Guild of Magic would also take over a position that played a decisive role in the Supreme Council. Furthermore, there was a high chance to be like Anduin and Rosen, and become a powerful contender for the seat of an arbitrator. If it was any other mage that got such an opportunity, they would be grateful towards the Supreme Council while desperately researching magic and making decisions for the guild. However, with this young mage called Felik, it had become another thing. Ever since coming to the Breezy Plains, it could be said that Moke had seen everything. Let's see, in these 2 months, what has this Felik done? The first month was still acceptable. Although this guy was not hard-working, he was still staying indoors. But when it was the second month, the true nature of this guy appeared. He went to Dueland every day, and even got acquainted with scum like Roman. It was even worse these few days. He knew that the president inauguration ceremony is round the corner, and he still insists on going out with others, causing the completed work on the tower to wait for his settlement, unable to conclude. Moke really could not understand why the Supreme Council would choose such a lazy good-for-nothing to assume the role of president of the Breezy Plains Guild of Magic. The thing that Moke could not tolerate was that this fella actually dared to doubt his professional standards. He was a master of inscription. If you were to search the whole of Amril, there would only be a few inscribers that were more professional than himself. Yet, this fella's request for him was only 10 wards of bad luck. Wasn't this implying that he was looking down on Moke? Moke had never received such humiliation ever since he'd become a master of inscription. Humph, I really want to see what you can do with these 10 wards of bad luck. After Moke entered the room, he was not courteous with Lin Li at all. He just went straight to point. President Felik, I have already inscribed for you the 10 wards of bad luck that you wanted. I'm wondering if there is anything else that you want, President Felik. Why is it so fast? Lin Li softly mumbled. Honestly, Moke's visit had surprised him. He had actually thought of going to Dueland to visit Basel, that old con man, while he had the time today. That old con man had actually agreed to help him recruit a batch of strong mages. He was very cunning, so if Lin Li did not go over to press him, who knew when he would go back on his word? Oh yes, this old con himself as well. This fellow was a genuine legendary mage. If he could be pulled into the Guild of Magic, Lin Li would not have to worry about anyone being a threat to himself for at least 1.5 years. Hence, Lin Li called for Norfeller and Uchfalusi early in the morning, preparing to bring them to Dueland's library again. Who knew that his door would be blocked by Moke before he could even wash up? President Felik, do you want to take a look now? Moke's expression was not looking good. To make a master of inscription inscribe 10 words of bad luck was a very humiliating thing. Moke did not think that after forcing himself to inscribe it, Lin Li would actually say, "Why is it so fast?" Wasn't this clearly doubting his professional standards? Moke held it in again and again before he finally suppressed the urge to let loose and curse. It was just that when he spoke again, his tone was clearly stiffer. "Let's go take a look, then." It was a pity. Lin Li was having a headache now, wondering when he would have the time to go to Duland. That batch of mages under the breezy plains was the only power that he could rely on for support. If this thing was going to be messed up, his days in the breezy plains would no longer be peaceful. It was also why he did not even realize that Moke's tone had become stiffer. Naturally, given Lin Li's nature, even if he noticed it, he would not bother about. No one was bound to each other by ties, so why should he try to curry favor with him? What, he said he was a master of inscription? F***ck, Lin Li was a guru of inscription. Lin Li was wrecking his brains while walking out of Black Cloud's town. When he stood at the entrance of the town, he could already see some of the outline of the tower. The tall and rugged tower was covered in magical runes. Under the early morning sunlight, it emitted a mysterious yet solemn aura. A short Herza was standing at the main entrance of the tower, chatting with a few of the engineers while raising his head and looking over at the town's entrance. "Morning, Mr. Herza." "Morning, Mage Felix." "Oh, no, it should be President Felix now." Herza greeted both of them with a face of smiles. He made jokes while introducing the engineers beside him to Lin Li. These engineers were all sent over by the Supreme Council. At least 20 towers out of the 24 guilds of magic in the Felon Kingdom were made by them. Although their magical power was not strong, they still received courteous reception from the presidents of the bigger guilds, no matter where they went. Naturally, Lin Li was no exception. He was rather courteous towards these engineers. Of course, such courtesy was not only because of the other party's identity. It was mostly because they had completed all of his requests. When the construction of the tower had just begun, Herza asked Lin Li if he had any requests for the structure of the tower. Back then, Lin Li did not think much about it. He just requested for several things right off the bat. When he thought about it again, he suddenly realized that those requests were rather harsh. Initially, he thought that these engineers would shout and curse, but who knew that when the tower was slowly completed, Lin Li would suddenly realize that those requests had been meticulously carried out by these engineers. It was also why Lin Li still felt embarrassed until now. Actually, this was not weird at all. The engineers sent by the Supreme Council this time were all people that were devoted to the field of construction. Their character was rather weird by nature. When they heard of those requests, the first thought that appeared in the minds of these engineers was not "this fella is trying to take me for a ride," but "this fella actually had the guts." People that were brave had always been able to leave a good impression on them. Furthermore, the current Lin Li was definitely worthy of being described as a promising young mage, no matter which perspective he was viewed from. The most distinguished young mage out of all the 24 guilds of magic and the victor of the finals in the Aurora Square already had the powers of the Archmage level at such a young age. Currently, he was being appointed as the president of the Breezy Plains Guild of Magic. This was the youngest president of any guild of magic in the past 1,300 years. Furthermore, he had a unique understanding of architecture. Naturally, the engineers were happy to deal with such a person. Herza only casually gave a few words of introduction, and everyone started chatting very passionately. That harmonious atmosphere was similar to that between old friends that had not met for a long while. As for Moke, who was at the side, he could not help mumbling, "When did this fella turn into a social butterfly? Why is he able to converse with these temperamental and stubborn engineers immediately after meeting them for the first time?" Actually, this was not weird. Although Lin Li was not proficient in architecture, as the saying went, "I have seen enough to manage on my own." For Lin Li, who was proficient in the 5 arts of survival, it was not difficult to converse with these engineers. The knowledge in his brain was sufficient for him to deal with the current circumstances. He could even use the foundation of his 5 arts of survival and give out some suggestions that would light up the eyes of the engineers. Anyway, no matter what Moke mumbled, Lin Li had indeed built up friendship with the engineers within a short time. One of the engineers called Luke even made a promise on the spot: if the Tower of the Breezy Plains needed any modifications in the future, he would be willing to help out at any time. Frack, Moke's mouth was immediately wide open. He could not believe what he had just heard. These engineers were well known in the Supreme Council for being temperamental and stubborn. Nobody could order them around except for a given few. Even if it were the presidents of the bigger guilds asking for their help, they would still have to ask for it with tactful words. As for whether the engineers would accept in the end, it would still depend on their mood. Moke had not imagined that these temperamental and stubborn fellas would actually be so kind to Felix. They even took the initiative and promised to help when the other party did not even mention anything. The group of people chatted while they walked into the guild hall. In the middle of the guild hall, the engineers placed a large crystal ball as per Lin Li's request. There were 3 spells already fixed on the crystal ball: Warlock's Eyes, Mirror of Truth, and Mana Hallucination. The design of this crystal was similar to the one at the Emerald Tower, for it linked the Mana Hallucination to Warlock's Eyes. Through this crystal ball, Lin Li would be able to clearly see every single movement within 100 miles from the tower. Of course, there were some differences between the two. The Mirror of Truth was deliberately added by Lin Li. In order to add on a Mirror of Truth other than fixing those 2 spells, the engineers had really wrecked their brains. However, after seeing the effects today, they all felt that their efforts were not in vain. The Mirror of Truth was a level 6 spell, and most mages could easily master it. But when it was fixed onto a crystal ball, receiving support from the tower's mana supply, its effect would completely change. The effect of the level 6 Mirror of Truth only had a radius of at most 10 meters. It was specially used for dealing with invisible effects. For example, the mage's invisibility, or a high-ranked bandit's sneak. For a magician, this was essentially a method to prevent assassination. But when its radius was extended to hundreds of meters, it would be a wholly different matter. The Mirror of Truth would cover the whole tower, and when somebody harboring ill intentions came near, their primary form would immediately show up on the crystal ball. Really gutsy. After seeing this crystal ball with his own eyes, even Moke could not help but silently feel admiration for Felix's guts. Fixing 2 spells on the crystal ball had long been a rule that was accepted as common practice among mages. This did not mean that they were unwilling to fix more spells, but it was just that the tolerance of the crystal ball for magical elements had its limits. Every addition of a strand of magical elements would increase the chance of failure. Even if it was just a level 6 spell, it would also require thousands of tries before it would work. The price of a crystal ball would easily be 100,000 gold coins. Who would be so free as to part ways with astronomical amounts of gold coins? However, Moke did not realize that this crystal ball in front of him was not exactly the same as the one he had seen before. There was no difference to detect just by scanning it, but if he were to scrutinize it, he would realize that the crystal ball's luster was slightly darker, and the brightness was a little brighter. But all of these differences were not obvious. Actually, if Moke were to reach out and touch it, he would immediately realize that this crystal ball was actually a little warm. However, even if Moke really were to touch it, he would probably only find it a little odd. After all, things like psionic crystals were not common knowledge. In fact, it was not only Moke, even those engineers that installed the crystal ball themselves only knew that it was rather weird. As to why was it weird, they could not explain it. After all, they were only well versed in architecture. It was outside of their field when it came to the magical crystalloids. Out of so many people present, only Lin Li knew why it was possible to fix 3 spells onto this crystal ball. It was because this crystal ball was taken out by Lin Li himself. When the construction of the tower had just begun, Herza had already reminded Lin Li that it was best to install a crystal ball in the tower. This way, surveillance of the surroundings would be very convenient. After listening to this, Lin Li almost immediately thought about the psionic crystal inside the Ring of Endless Storm. An incomparable ability to amplify magic and an outstanding characteristic to contain elements that surpassed an average crystals. No matter which aspect it was the best choice to be the crystal ball. But Lin Li was not satisfied. How could monitoring the tower's surroundings be compared to monitoring the whole Black Clouds town? Lin Li took a look around the crystal ball and, with a smile, asked Moke, "Oh, yes, Mr. Moke, could you do me a small favor?" "What small favor?" Moke was clearly in a daze for a bit. This place, Lin Li's finger lightly glided across the crystal ball, and finally landed on the base that was cast from brilliant thorium. "I wonder if I can add a countercurrent mageweth at this place." "Countercurrent mageweth?" Moke was in a daze again when he heard it. Of course he knew the countercurrent mageweth. It was one of the high-level mageweths that had the simplest structures. It included a total of 13 magic nodes as well as an element-amplifying circuit. Most of the times, the countercurrent mageweth would be in a hibernation state, but once it was triggered by mana, the countercurrent mageweth would amplify that mana and release powerful magical elements instantly. Moke was all too familiar with the countercurrent mageweth. Out of 10 magic staffs, at least 9 would use the countercurrent mageweth. As for the magic staves that Moke had dealt with so far, he could not even remember how many of them there were. However, Moke could not understand why Felix would suddenly have this request. Could it be that he did not know that the countercurrent mageweth should not even be placed at the base of a crystal ball? The unique property of the countercurrent mageweth was to suddenly increase mana and use that instantaneous explosive strength to injure opponents. But if it were to be inscribed on the crystal ball's base, what could it harm other than the crystal ball itself? "Let me try." Of course, Moke was not stupid enough to remind the other party of it. In fact, to be able to see the other party make a big fool out of himself was all Moke wished for. "Don't like you playing games? Okay then, I'll help you inscribe the countercurrent mageweth. When the crystal ball can't bear the burden and explodes, I'll see how you'll apply for another one from the Supreme Council. This is hundreds of thousands of gold coins. You will not be able to pay for it even if you sell your pants." "Then I'll thank you in advance, Mr. Moke." "You're welcome." Stimulated by the idea of gloating over Lin Li's imminent misfortune, the smile on Moke's face widened significantly. He incessantly asked Lin Li what he wanted from the countercurrent mageweth while asking somebody to bring his tools over. Moke's tools were not complicated: a glittering and translucent crystal pen and a bottle of sky blue ink. For a master of inscription, this seemed rather scrubby, but Lin Li did not see it that way. The crystal pen did not seem special when scanning it, but if it was closely inspected, it would be easy to realize that there seemed to be some mist revolving around the tip of the pen. Lin Li knew that most likely it was a twilight crystal that was associated with a few mineral veins. Crystal pens made from the twilight crystal had one big advantage, and that was that they could distribute mana with great accuracy. Inscription itself was an art that was meticulous in every way. A successful mageweth did not tolerate a single mistake, especially so when the inscriber was distributing mana. Just a single deviation would result in a completely different result. Thus, inscribers used crystal pens to draw mageweths. It was because crystals themselves were the most sensitive magical crystalloids. Any small changes in mana would appear in the most representative visual manner. As for twilight crystal, it was the most sensitive type among all of the crystals. With crystal pens made from twilight crystals, one could almost completely eradicate any mistakes in mana distribution. The Supreme Council is indeed wealthy. Looking at that inscription pen made from twilight crystal, even Lin Li could not help but silently gasp in admiration. This was not something that was commonly seen. Even in the endless world, Lin Li only saw it twice. Once, it was already made into a crystal pen, and was being held in the hands of the inscriber apprentice Altolia. The other was at the cave of the Dragon of Destruction, Azardas. After a dragon blood adamantine mineral vein had been dug up, a piece of twilight crystal was sitting amongst the rocks. It had almost made Lin Li salivate on the spot. It seemed like monsters that had survived since the Dark Ages, like the Supreme Council, were not something any normal forces could be compared to. Ignore their monstrous strength, that was like something from myths, and the influence they had over thousands of mages. Just the wealth that had been accumulating for 1,300 years was sufficient for most forces to give up all hope of contending with them. This was no longer a matter of a sum of money. Something as precious as the twilight crystal could not be bought with money. The man's family was rich, right? The Marathon family was rich, right? But, who among those two families would be able to take out a piece of twilight crystal? Of course, even if they had one, they did not have the guts to take it out, either. It was fine to be rich, but once they held a treasure that could only be found by luck, who knew whether it would cost some powerhouse to cast greedy eyes on it? An archmage might not be able to snatch it, but a legendary mage should be able to, right? Amril had countless powerhouses, but not all of them were as polite as Anduin. However, Moke was definitely not afraid of anyone snatching it. It was because one of the two strongest forces of Amril, the Supreme Council, stood behind him. Hence, he could peacefully take out the twilight crystal pen and draw outlines on the brilliant thorium base. No matter whether Lin Li liked this middle-aged man with a stiff tone, he still had to admit this time that Moke's attainments in inscriptions had already reached the master level. He held the twilight crystal pen in one hand and gently dipped it in the sky-blue ink. After that, he hastily started drawing. In an instant, he had announced that the countercurrent mageweth has been completed. This time was really too sudden, I was not prepared. President Felix, why don't you take a look first? If there is any unsatisfactory place, please let me know. After drawing out the last element amplifying circuit on the brilliant thorium base, Moke gently placed the twilight crystal pen on the table and looked at the young guild president proudly. Moke understood himself very well. He knew that he did not have any incredible talent in magic. He was already in his 40s, and he had only just broken through to the archmage realm. But in the field of inscriptions, Moke did not believe there was anyone that could surpass him. Even if it was the first universally accepted inscriber, Alana Guild of Magic's Aldwin, he only became a master of inscription in his 60s. Compared to the current Moke, he was only better in terms of experience. In terms of comprehending inscriptions per se, he was not Moke's equal. Although Moke had asked Lin Li to point out any errors, his gaze towards the other party was totally different. Today, Moke had contentedly vindicated himself. The countercurrent mageweth that he just drew was definitely one of the few proud works he had recently. Not only did he use the twilight crystal pen that he did not usually use, he also added a few skills that he created during the process for drawing. Moke believed that even if Aldwin were to be present, he would not even able to find any faults. Mr. Moke really likes to crack jokes. You are the person of authority for inscription in the Supreme Council. How would I, a young junior, dare to point out what is unsatisfactory? Lin Li's face still had a smile that was brimming with enthusiasm, but as he spoke, he frowned slightly. But Mr. Moke, isn't this element amplifying circuit too near to the source of mana? Moke was so confident that he almost thought he misheard when Lin Li really pointed something out. He was actually giving directions to Moke? Moke simply could not believe that this young brat actually wishfully thought of trying to point out his faults. What's wrong, Mr. Moke? You do not look well, are you sick? Moke almost choked on his breath. If it was not because Herza was at the side, Moke would already spit his saliva. All of this was in a mess, and it was too near to the source of mana. Moke really could not imagine how clueless a person had to be to say such things. Anybody that possessed general knowledge about inscription knew that under the circumstances where the mageweth's structure allowed it, the nearer the core circuit was to the source mana, the better it was. It was because only through that the avoidance of depletion was at its highest. Damn it, so this fella does not know anything. What ward of bad luck, what countercurrent mageweth? God knows where he heard of these. No wonder he's so stupid enough to inscribe countercurrent mageweth on to the base of the crystal ball. In an instant, Moke really did not know if he should cry or laugh. A master of inscriptions' time had actually been wasted by a brat that did not know anything. Moke had even held his breath and displayed the inscription skills that he was most proud of just to subdue the opposition. But, he did not think that the opposition was just a layman who did not even know the basic general knowledge. The inscription skills that he was proud had entirely been seen as unsatisfactory in the other party's eyes. "Thank you, President Felix. I am very well." Moke seemingly completed this sentence in blocks. "Oh, that's good. That's good," Lin Li only then heaved a sigh of relief. He sized up Moke thoroughly with concern while saying, "I thought that it was because Mr. Moke just arrived in the breezy plains and fell sick because of not being acclimatized." Moke almost choked on his breath again. This time, he held in again and again before he finally held back the impulse to curse and swear. It was just that although he squeezed out an awkward smile on his face, he had already started swearing in his heart. "Only you are king unacclimatized, your whole family is unacclimatized." "Oh yes, Mr. Moke. I seem to have heard it from someone, but brilliant thorium tools have the property of warping mana. I'm not sure if that affected the countercurrent ManhwaRecap that you inscribed just now." After Lin Li showed concern with a face of sincerity, he walked around the crystal ball again. The words that Lin Li said were asked in a very casual manner. It was just like asking, "Have you eaten?" or "How's the weather today?" But when it fell on Moke's ears, it immediately scared him till he started having cold sweat. Indeed, the brilliant thorium did have the property of warping mana. Usually, this property was not an issue, but when a countercurrent ManhwaRecap had been inscribed on brilliant thorium, this property would suddenly become fatal. Although Moke was narrow-minded, he was not an idiot like Lazaric. Furthermore, he was also a genuine master of inscription. Lin Li, a guru of inscription, aside, the attainments Moke had in inscriptions would definitely be of the top standard even if it was compared to the whole of Anril. With Moke's attainments in inscriptions, how could he not understand what the brilliant thorium's property of warping mana would do to the countercurrent ManhwaRecap that he had just inscribed? Brilliant thorium warping mana was just a more ambiguous way of putting it. An accurate way to put it would be that brilliant thorium would use a twisting method and purify mana. This was also the reason why many precision magical devices used brilliant thorium as the base. No matter what kind of crystal was mounted on the base, it would all change into the cleanest and purest mana after undergoing the twisting by the brilliant thorium. For crystal ball-type precision magical devices, the brilliant thorium was the best match. Maintaining the cleanliness and purity of mana would extend the lifespan of the crystal ball to the greatest degree. It could also minimize the chances of failing the most. However, for the countercurrent ManhwaRecap that Moke had just inscribed, the brilliant thorium could bring about an almost destructive blow. The theory behind countercurrent ManhwaRecap was actually very simple. With 13 magic nodes connected to the source of mana, the mana stored in the source would immediately surge forth once triggered by external forces. At the same time, the element amplifying circuit would start to work, breaking the operating mode of countercurrent ManhwaRecap. On one hand, there was continuous influx. On the other, there was continuous efflux. The originally stable mana flow had immediately turned into two forces of mana colliding, so an instantaneous explosion would naturally come about. But the fault was that the countercurrent ManhwaRecap that Moke had inscribed did not have its own source of mana. It was inscribed on the brilliant thorium base. This also meant that this countercurrent ManhwaRecap was sharing the same source of mana with the crystal ball. When the countercurrent ManhwaRecap was triggered by external forces, it would not be supplied with mana by the source of mana, but it would be passively accepting the mana surging from the brilliant thorium base. This would be troublesome. Once it had undergone the brilliant thorium's twisting, mana would become clean and pure. It would not be possible to reverse it with the brilliant thorium's operating mode. Of course, there was a solution. All it needed was 13 magic nodes on the countercurrent ManhwaRecap to let the mana escape from the brilliant thorium's constraint, restoring the original operation mode. This seemingly complicated problem would naturally be resolved, but in Moke's design, space had long been reduced to the maximum. How could it be easy to add another 13 magic nodes? Unless it was going be as how that fella said it. Adjust the position of the element amplifying circuit, and thus gain some space for the 13 magic nodes in exchange. Originally, Moke was waiting for the other party to become a joke, but he had carelessly forgotten about the property of brilliant thorium, and had actually fallen to the state of being seen as a joke by a layman. In a moment, Moke really did not know how to describe his feelings. That feeling of having no place to hide oneself was like he had been slapped. Moke stood there, his face pale. His mouth was wide open for a while, but he did not know how to answer the opposition's question. This time, Moke really did not dare to answer it haphazardly, because he suddenly realized that he could not figure out this young mage called Felix anymore. Calling him an outsider to inscription was hard, for everything he had said was about the most crucial point. But to say that he was an expert in inscription. Moke did not dare believe it. Any expert would have to go through countless failures in exchange for a broad and profound knowledge of inscriptions. Without tens of years of thorough research, nobody would be able to get such knowledge out of thin air. Indeed, this young mage in front of him could be a true genius, but so what? Isn't Aldwin from Alana's Guild of Magic a genius? Am I, Moke, not a genius? No matter how much of a genius, it was impossible to be successful without going through failure. Furthermore, based on the information that Mr. Rosen had provided, this Felix should be a genius in magic. Moke believed that there was nobody in this world that would have everything when born. A person that was proficient in magic and inscription. How could there be such a good deal in this world? Moke silently told himself that he would have to be careful about everything he said or did before figuring out the truth about this fella. The mistake he made with the location of the element amplifying circuit just now could still be chalked up to his forgetting about the property of brilliant thorium. But, if he were to make any more mistakes, he would completely throw his old face in the breezy plains. Moke looked around. Be it Herza or those engineers, they were all looking at him with faces of anticipation. This time, Moke really did not dare to say anything else. It was still easy to speak for Herza, but those engineers did not have much propriety in speech. If he were to do something stupid, they would definitely not mind helping spread the word. By that time, it would only take a few days for the word of his stupidity to spread among the Supreme Council. Moke said this more than several times, and did not elaborate on any reasons. Instead, it was Lin Li, who had cocked his ears to listen, that became impatient. He shook his head and walked around the crystal ball. In the end, his gaze was set upon the countercurrent Mageweth again. Mr. Moke. I am just casually saying. If I were to be mistaken, please don't take offense. Don't mention it. President Felix really knows how to joke. If it was before, Moke would most likely roll his eyes and display a disdainful look. He would most likely scold him, saying, "Your hair has not even grown yet, and you dare to give me directions?" Well, things like that. But now, Moke did not dare to do that. He was ambiguous even when he spoke, for he was scared he would create another joke. Luckily, Felix did not realize his awkwardness. After scanning through the Mageweth once, he then pointed at the brilliant thorium base again with a hesitant look, and said, "It's because I have also seen President Aldwin draw a countercurrent Mageweth back when I was at Alana. It was somewhat different from yours." Lin Li's voice got softer and softer, but Moke's eyes lit up as he listened. When Lin Li had finished speaking, the awkwardness on Moke's face had completely disappeared, and in its place was a look of sudden realization. No wonder. No wonder he said that there were deviations in the element amplifying circuit that Moke had inscribed. The questions that Moke had were suddenly answered in that moment. Like I said, this fella is only in his 20s. How could he be proficient in inscriptions? That small mistake could only be seen if Aldwin was here. After all, he was more than 100 years old. In terms of experience, he would definitely be better than Moke. This fella had been giving directions illogically for the whole day. So, it was because he had seen Aldwin inscribe the countercurrent Mageweth before back then at Alana. For a stranger to inscriptions, it was only natural that the countercurrent Mageweth that this master of inscription, Aldwin, had inscribed was the only benchmark. Some people that had seen the countercurrent Mageweth that Moke had inscribed would of course think that he was wrong, but they did not know that he had used some special skills and slightly changed the position of the element amplifying circuit. F*CK, it all boils down to doing something extra. Of all things to do, I had to show off my skills in front of an outsider. In the end, I did not even get a single praise, but instead almost had a heart attack. After thinking in this manner, Moke had somewhat calmed down. When he looked at Lin Li again, his gaze was no longer as nervous before. With an unfathomable look, he said, "President Felix, I need to remind you that I am me, and Aldwin is Aldwin. Masters of inscriptions have their own styles. The things we are good at are different." "I see," Lin Li nodded. It was just that his tone was plain, it did not sound sincere. Luckily, Moke did not mind after being frightened just now. Now, he was wrecking his brains to find an excuse to leave. Otherwise, if he were to wait for this kid to suddenly think of asking him to activate the countercurrent mageweth for a trial, he might really throw his face away. Others might be clueless, but how could Moke not know about the mageweth that he had inscribed himself? This countercurrent mageweth was already useless. It did not have more support from magic nodes when inscribed on the brilliant thorium base. The element amplifying circuit had no way of functioning. It was still alright if nobody inputted any mana to activate it, but if somebody were to try and input mana to activate it, they would realize that the countercurrent mageweth was just a decoration. No matter what it was, he still had to leave first. As for the aftermath, he could just wait for everyone to leave and sneak back in to make a new inscription. After all, it was just a countercurrent mageweth. For Master of Inscription, making one was just a matter of seconds. Unfortunately, that fella called Felix was not tactful. Moke had already covered his mouth and yawned for a long while, and this fella still did not understand his cue. He just kept dragging on and asking questions. Could it be that he did not realize that Moke did not want to talk to him? *CK, he is too thick-skinned. Moke silent cursed in his heart. He did not want to give this fella any more respect. You just have to drag me along and not let me leave, right? Fine, I'll show you a joke first. Oh, yes, President Felix, about the 10 wards of bad luck that you asked me to inscribe, I have already completed them. Do you want to take a look at them now? Of course, of course. Haha. Well then, President Felix, Mr. Herza and engineers, please follow me. Seeing that this fellow was being reckless, Moke could not help but feel contented. He thought, you almost gave me a heart attack just now. This time, I want to see what kind of tricks you can still pull off. What an idiot. You actually asked a master of inscription to inscribe wards of bad luck. Don't you know just a single ward of bad luck would cause a large piece of land to become barren? You actually recklessly asked for 10. I really want to see how are you going to explain yourself to the Supreme Council. Moke guided the group through the hall, and they soon entered the basement of the tower after going down a series of steps. The thick walls blocked off the morning sun rays, and the surrounding air was turbid. However, the spooky aura could not shield that intense magical wave. This was the nucleus of the whole tower, and all of the magical devices in the tower were supported by these tightly shut secret rooms. The engineers that had designed the tower personally comprehended everything here the best. Of course they knew that out of all these secret rooms, there was one meant for providing energy for the tower. To this day, they still remembered that this President Felix had come to the incomplete tower by himself on a night with a clear moon and few stars, and mounted a fiery red magical crystal on the source of mana. After that, the whole tower was surrounded by an enormous magical power. The engineers did not understand what sort of magical crystal it was, but they knew that the magical power it contained was definitely enough to make most of the mages in this world go crazy. However, the room that everyone was going to enter this time was not the secret room that source of mana was placed in. It was the room beside it. Moke personally opened the door of the secret room, and a swathe of crimson brilliance appeared in front of everyone. From afar, it looked like a pool of blood under the night sky. It was filled with a bloody but mysterious aura. Lin Li stood in front of the crimson light. There were exactly 10 wards of bad luck before him. President Felix, those are the 10 wards of bad luck that you wanted. Thank you. Lin Li nodded his head, and did not mind the provocation in Moke's gaze. He just quietly stood there and felt the magical waves coming from the crimson light. Moke was indeed a master Moke. These 10 wards of bad luck were completed rather beautifully. Be it in terms of mana distribution or drawing skills, they could be described as a rare and excellent product. From Lin Li's perspective, these 10 wards of bad luck only had one weakness. It was that they were too near to each other. This could be due to Moke's character, his natural pettiness. He liked to use cyclic compression when dealing with space. The countercurrent Manhwa outside had already proven this point. Of course, it could also be that Moke's magical attainments were not sufficient. He had only just broken through to the Archmage realm when he was already in his 40s. Naturally, he would be different from Lin Li, who had an instinctive sensitivity to mana. A lack of magical attainments as well as being too devoted to inscription design had caused Moke to make a small mistake. These 10 wards of bad luck were rather independent, but the overly compact design would cause them to interfere with and reject each other. The chaos of the magical waves could possibly trigger some unforeseen accidents. But all that did not matter to Lin Li. What Lin Li needed was not some ward of bad luck. The uses for the ward of bad luck were indeed very evil. Normally, those necromancers that did not have enough power would borrow the strength of the ward of bad luck. The only use for the ward of bad luck was that it would change everything in its surroundings into barren land. Be it plants or animals, they would all lose their lives in this barren land. This was what the necromancers loved the most. They needed such evil power. By relying on the ward of bad luck, their necromagic would become stronger. Be it summoning or control, it would all be many times stronger than before. From a certain point of view, the ward of bad luck was like a humorous domain that had been weakened several times. Other than that, the most useful part about the ward of bad luck should be being a magical trap. It was especially so when hunting strong magical beasts. Mages needed a special way to weaken the monster's strength and resistance. At this point, the curse of the ward of bad luck could come into play. Magical beasts affected by the ward of bad luck's curse would lose a portion of their strength for a short period of time. By using this chance, it would be much easier to capture or kill them. However, this was not what Lin Li wanted. The ward of bad luck could strengthen undead creatures, but Norfeller and Ujfalusi weren't included among them. Norfeller was a high-ranking vampire, and thus relied on naturally powerful physical strength as well as the dark magic vampires were born with. It was needless to talk about Ujfalusi. He could summon humorous wyrms and create noble liches from the humorous domain. Why would he be affected by a small, little ward of bad luck? As for magical traps, if Lin Li was willing, he could inscribe magical traps that were 10 times stronger than the ward of bad luck. What Lin Li needed was a more powerful weapon. Moke, may I borrow your inscription pen for a bit? Huh? This request of Lin Li's was really too random. Moke was stunned for a long while before he nodded with hesitation and took out an inscription pen from his tool bag. Lin Li took a look. The one that Moke took out was that inscription pen that was made from twilight crystal. It seemed like this master of inscription was rather generous other than being narrow-minded. However, Lin Li still shook his head after being in a short daze. This one will not do, Mr. Moke. Do you have something bigger? Moke almost puked blood on the spot. After being an inscriber for so many years, Moke had never seen someone that would not know how to appreciate what was good. Didn't he know that the inscription pen that Moke had lent him was a treasure that inscribers could only dream of? He still asked if there was something bigger. F***CK. Does he think that the inscription pens are like carrots, the bigger, the better? Something bigger. If it's too big, can your mom handle it? Moke could feel the veins on his forehead swelling at that moment. He took in deep breaths forcefully before he could hold back the impulse to curse and swear. Take it. After taking out another inscription pen from his tool bag, it was as if Moke had thrown it at Lin Li's face. Thank you. But Lin Li did not mind it. After receiving the inscription pen, he still politely thanked him. Afterward, Lin Li stood in front of the crimson light. This time, he stood there for 10 minutes. Suddenly, the secret room got quiet. Although Moke was filled with rage, at this time, he could not help but feel curious. He really wanted to see what this fellow was trying to do by borrowing his inscription pen. Could it be? Could it be that he wanted to make amendments to the words of bad luck that Moke had inscribed? This thought had just surfaced in his mind, but Moke could not help but smile. His smile was filled with self-mockery. It seemed like the false alarm just now had totally scared him if he actually had such a ridiculous thought. Of course, Moke himself knew the words of bad luck that he had inscribed the best. Even if Aldwin were to come over personally, he would not even have the ability to improve anything, not to mention this outsider that knew nothing. Everybody was a master. How could trying to amend the other party's work be as easy as talking? Unless it was the legendary guru of inscription taking action, only then it would be a slim chance. Not only Moke, the engineers were the same. The few of them stood there and blankly looked at Lin Li. Their natural profession sensitivity had told them that most likely something one could never imagine was about to happen. They really wanted to see what kind of shocking things this young and mysterious guild president was going to do. Out of so many people present, only Herza was looking normal. This old man that had witnessed the finals in the Aurora Square and heard several stories from Macklin was probably the one that understood Lin Li the most out of everyone else here. Herza knew that this young mage called Felik was a genuine miracle creator. No matter how impossible it was, as long as it happened to him, it would all suddenly make sense. In fact, back when Moke had inscribed the countercurrent mageweth, Herza had already acutely perceived something. It was just that firstly, he was not confident, and secondly, he was trying to protect Moke's reputation. He just held it back, and did not ask. An outsider that knew nothing? If Anduin heard this, who knew how hard he would be laughing right now? Time seemed to pass by unusually slowly. Everything in the room seemed to be frozen in place. Everyone's gazes simultaneously fell on Lin Li, or on the hand that was holding the inscription pen. After that, they saw that this young mage suddenly moved. The glittering and translucent crystal pen was gently dipped into the bottle of sky blue ink. After that, a stream of sky blue light lit up everyone's eyes. Lin Li's movements were shockingly fast. Even those genuine high-level bandits might not be able to keep up with them. The crystal pen in his hand seemed to transform into a stream of light, painting lines amidst the plane of crimson red. It was as if some sort of life power had been given to the right hand that was holding the inscription pen at this moment. It made everything have a lethal sense of beauty. At this point, even those lines that were as dry as sawdust were also filled with life, pulsating along with the inscription pen and creating a dreamy scene with the crimson red and sky blue color. **T, after seeing Lin Li moving, Herza immediately knew something was wrong. This was not a joke. Even if Herza was not proficient in inscription, he also knew that modifying the work of an inscriber was the taboo of all taboos. This was like giving another inscriber a slap, but this time, the inscriber was someone of authority from the Supreme Council, Master Moke. I'm doomed. If these two had some small disputes before, then from now, these two would completely become enemies with each other. With Moke's narrow-mindedness, how could he tolerate such a humiliation? There was going to be big trouble this time. Herza just hoped that it would not affect the presidential inauguration ceremony that was in few days' time. However, the expression on Moke's face could be described as unusually brilliant. It shifted from shock to anger, and then from anger to realization. In the end, it all became pale. A type of pale filled with despair. Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.